For a long time throughout the history of the Zelda franchise, one question has been hotly debated by fans. When do the games take place? For some reason, a lot of people really care about the order of the events the games occurred in. I wouldn't be able to tell you why. It's not like you see people clamoring for an established Mario timeline. Perhaps it's because of the epic scope of the Zelda games and occasional continuity nods that led to fans wishing for something greater. Whatever the reason, it was a big point of speculation and contention in the Zelda fan base up until 2011, and even beyond 2011. What happened in 2011? Well, Nintendo did something weird. They actually looked at fan discussion for once and decided to provide answers. And so they came up with an overly convoluted three-timeline system that they themselves have already essentially discarded. Why? Because the idea of a Zelda timeline in and of itself is inherently pretty stupid. The Legend of Zelda games weren't initially designed with a timeline in mind. I mean, the first two Zelda games were designed with direct continuity to each other. The Legend of Zelda led into Adventure of Link. But after that, there wasn't really a clear timeline. You might be able to piece one together based on out-of-universe Word of God stuff, but for the most part, games would come after each other arbitrarily, and some games, those being Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, would directly contradict each other, which is what led to the infamous three-timeline split in the first place. So to cobble them all together like this just doesn't feel right, and frankly, I don't see a point in it. Zelda isn't one connected story. Well, I mean it is, but it doesn't feel that way. I never loved Zelda because of some arbitrary connective tissue between games. I never loved Zelda because of this idea that there was a destined cycle bound to forever repeat itself between good and evil. I love it because of each game's individual ideas. I love the epic scope of Twilight Princess and the subtextual coming-of-age tale of Ocarina of Time. It's no secret that some of the least important games to the timeline, those being Majora's Mask and Link's Awakening, are two of my favorites. I don't like them because they're not connected to the timeline, but I think being disconnected from a coherent timeline did help them become better experiences. They were allowed to tell their own stories without this overarching Zelda canon hanging over them, and that made them more interesting. Majora's Mask is set in this alternate parallel world where everything is different. If it had to be connected to things from prior games or chronologically future games, I think that would have ruined the mystique a little bit. The only connections it has are to Ocarina of Time, and those connections are to show how bizarre everything is. Link's Awakening is in a similar spot. It's this dream, this island. It's fundamentally not even a Zelda game in terms of plot, and that is part of why I love it so much. The experiences you have in these games are not predicated on this half-baked, hastily slapped together timeline. And frankly, that's why I dislike the Zelda timeline. I think that these games are all worthy of their own analysis, and that connecting them for no reason cheapens them. It makes them feel like a series of events on a timeline. Just a bunch of things that happened on different dates in a millennia-long conflict. They don't need to be connected to justify their existence. It's why one of my favorite choices in Breath of the Wild was to actively ignore the timeline. And I hope that, as time goes on, the timeline continues to be ignored, because it ultimately just confuses things arbitrarily. It doesn't add anything to the individual pieces of art. The context of these games being connected doesn't make them feel more interesting or improve the quality of their stories. It's just drawing lines between objects for the sake of drawing lines between objects. It's fun, but there's no point to it. This has been Arcade Gen Everlasting, split into 3 due to actions of the past, signing off. Thank you for watching.